That is the estimated amount of inherited wealth destroyed every generation in America and Europe. Not stolen, not lost in stock market crashes, not wiped out by recessions. Destroyed quietly by ordinary families who were psychologically unprepared to receive money they did not build themselves. And the terrifying part? Most of them never even realize it happened. Because wealth destruction rarely looks dramatic. It looks normal. A house sold too quickly. An inheritance spent slowly over 10 years. Sibling conflicts that drain assets through legal fees. Bad investments made during grief. Lifestyle inflation disguised as finally enjoying life. The money disappears silently. Researchers studying generational wealth found something brutal. Around 70% of wealthy families lose most of their wealth by the second generation. By the third generation, 90% is gone. Think about how insane that is. One generation sacrifices everything to build wealth. The next generation receives it. The third generation barely remembers it existed. That is not bad luck. That is a system failure. And right now, the largest wealth transfer in modern history is already happening. Baby boomers in the UK and USA are expected to transfer tens of trillions of dollars to their children over the next 2 decades. Homes, investment accounts, businesses, retirement funds, life insurance, property portfolios, and millions of people receiving that money are completely unprepared for what wealth actually does to human behavior. Because inheritance does not just transfer money, it transfers pressure, responsibility, identity disruption, family conflict, and emotional decisions made during grief. Today, we are breaking down the psychology of inheritance shock. Why families lose generational wealth. Why sudden money destroys unprepared people. And the exact systems intelligent families use to protect wealth across generations instead of watching it disappear. Because if your parents spent 40 years building something valuable and you lose it in 10, that is not unfortunate. That is preventable. Most people believe inheritance problems are financial. They are wrong. Inheritance problems are psychological first. Because the human brain behaves differently around earned money and inherited money. Money you earn carries emotional weight. You remember the overtime shifts, the stress, the risk, the sacrifice required to get it. Inherited money arrives disconnected from struggle. And that disconnect changes behavior immediately. A person raised in a financially cautious household develops an identity around limits. Save carefully. Spend responsibly. Avoid unnecessary risk. But when sudden wealth appears, $200,000, a paid-off house, a 7-figure investment account, the brain experiences identity conflict. The person's self-image no longer matches their financial reality, and the brain hates inconsistency. So it tries to resolve the tension, usually through destructive behavior. Some people freeze completely. They avoid financial decisions because managing significant wealth feels overwhelming. Others swing into reckless spending. Luxury cars, bigger homes, investment opportunities pitched by friends, expensive lifestyles that quietly drain the inheritance over time. The brain subconsciously tries to return itself to the financial identity it understands. This is why lottery winners frequently go broke. This is why professional athletes lose fortunes. And this is why inherited wealth disappears so often. Because money amplifies emotional weaknesses that already existed. The heir who survives inheritance shock does something rare. They deliberately build a new identity. An identity capable of handling wealth responsibly. They stop seeing money as something to consume and start seeing it as something to manage strategically. That transition is not automatic. It requires education, emotional maturity, and preparation before the inheritance arrives. Without that preparation, wealth becomes temporary. Most families are terrible at talking about money, especially wealthy families. Parents spend decades building assets and almost no time preparing their children to manage those assets intelligently. The result? The heirs inherit wealth without inheriting the systems that created it. That is financial suicide disguised as generosity. The first generation often understands struggle deeply. They lived through debt, economic uncertainty, financial sacrifice. But many never explain those lessons clearly to their children. The children see the finished lifestyle, not the decades of discipline behind it. So when inheritance arrives, the emotional relationship with money is completely different. The parents viewed money as security. The children often view it as freedom. And those two mindsets produce completely different outcomes. Then grief enters the equation. Now the family is emotionally unstable while simultaneously making major financial decisions. That combination destroys rational thinking. And underneath everything sits the most dangerous force in inheritance: family dynamics, sibling resentment, old emotional wounds, unequal expectations, arguments about fairness. One child feels they sacrificed more. Another feels underappreciated. Another wants immediate access to cash. Inheritance becomes emotional warfare disguised as financial negotiation. This is how families destroy wealth that took generations to build. Not through stupidity, through emotion. And emotion without systems becomes chaos. The inheritance shock follows a predictable pattern. First comes emotional overload, the death itself, the grief, the stress, the legal process, the paperwork, the responsibility. Then comes financial confusion, accounts, properties, taxes, retirement plans, insurance payouts, investment portfolios. Many heirs suddenly realize they have no idea how family finances actually worked. Then comes pressure. Pressure to make decisions quickly. Pressure from relatives. Pressure from siblings. Pressure from financial advisors selling products. Pressure from lifestyle temptation. And during this period, the heir's brain is functioning poorly because grief directly affects decision-making quality. Research shows emotional distress significantly reduces rational financial judgment. Yet this is exactly when people make life-changing decisions. Selling homes too quickly. Splitting assets emotionally instead of strategically. Making risky investments. Spending to cope psychologically. And the inheritance slowly begins disappearing. Not all at once. Quietly. That is what makes inheritance shock so dangerous. Most heirs do not realize they are destroying wealth until years later. By then, the money is already gone. And the scariest part? The destruction usually feels reasonable while it is happening. That is why preparation matters more than intelligence. Even smart people make terrible decisions under emotional stress. Here is one of the most important wealth protection rules you will ever hear. No major financial decisions within the first 30 days after receiving inheritance unless legally required. No massive purchases. No sudden investments. No emotional gifting. No rushing to sell property. No dramatic lifestyle changes. Because grief and financial pressure create terrible decision-making conditions. People underestimate how emotionally destabilizing inheritance actually is, especially when the inheritance comes from someone deeply loved. The money itself becomes emotionally charged, and emotional money is dangerous money. The 30-day rule creates psychological distance. It gives the brain time to stabilize, time to gather information, time to involve professionals, time to think strategically instead of emotionally. The families that preserve wealth slow decisions down. The families that lose wealth rush decisions emotionally. And modern culture rewards emotional spending constantly. Life is short. Treat yourself. That mindset destroys inherited wealth faster than almost anything else. Because the moment inheritance becomes lifestyle fuel instead of long-term capital, the clock starts ticking toward financial decline. Nothing destroys inherited wealth faster than sibling conflict, especially around property. One inherited house can permanently destroy an entire family, because inheritance arguments are rarely about money alone. They are about recognition, fairness, resentment, emotional history. One sibling believes they sacrificed more. One feels ignored. One needs money urgently. One wants to keep the family home emotionally. Everyone believes their position is morally correct. Now combine that with grief and legal complexity. Disaster. Families spend years fighting over assets worth less than the emotional damage being created. Lawyers consume wealth. Relationships collapse permanently. And the inheritance disappears into conflict. The intelligent families prevent this through structure. Independent valuations. Clear wills. Defined timelines. Professional mediation. Systems stronger than emotion. Because once inheritance becomes emotional negotiation, logic disappears quickly. And here is the brutal truth. Many families avoid estate planning because they think discussing inheritance feels uncomfortable. Then their children pay for that avoidance later through chaos and resentment. The discomfort was temporary. The damage becomes permanent. Families that preserve wealth across generations usually follow the same formula. Education before inheritance. Transparency before crisis. Professional guidance before mistakes. And systems before emotion. That is the formula. Not luck. Not genius investing. Structure. Because wealth preservation is mostly behavioral. The family that survives inheritance shock understands one critical principle. The goal is not to spend inherited wealth. The goal is to protect the asset base while allowing it to compound further. That mindset changes everything. The inheritance becomes a foundation instead of temporary lifestyle enhancement. The money keeps working. The assets keep growing. Future generations benefit. This is how real generational wealth is built. Quietly. Strategically. Patiently. Not through flashy spending. Not through social status. And not through emotional financial decisions. Family businesses create the most dangerous inheritance situations of all, because businesses are not passive assets. They require leadership, operations, decision-making, management. And many business owners never prepare their children properly for transition. The founder knows everything: customers, systems, suppliers, finances, relationships. Then suddenly the founder dies or retires, and the heirs inherit responsibility they were never trained to handle. This destroys businesses constantly, not because the business lacked value, because succession planning never existed. The intelligent business owner prepares years in advance, processes documented, leadership developed, successors trained, financial systems organized. Without preparation, the heirs inherit stress disguised as opportunity, and stress destroys value rapidly. The inheritance shock is not really about money. It is about whether sacrifice survives transition. One generation builds. The next generation protects. The third generation expands. Or the cycle resets completely. Most people underestimate how fragile wealth actually is. A single badly managed inheritance can erase 50 years of discipline. That should terrify you. But it should also motivate you. Because inheritance failure is usually predictable. And predictable problems can be prevented. The families building lasting wealth are not perfect. They are prepared. They communicate early, educate heirs, create systems, and understand something emotionally mature people understand. Wealth is not owned permanently. It is managed temporarily between generations. Your responsibility is not merely to receive it. Your responsibility is to protect it long enough for future generations to build further. That is legacy. $3 trillion. Inherited, then lost. Not through catastrophe, through emotional unpreparedness. You now understand the inheritance shock, the psychology of sudden wealth, the emotional decisions that destroy families, the sibling conflicts, the grief-driven mistakes, and the systems that protect generational wealth before disaster begins. Now the question becomes simple. Will your family prepare or become another statistic? This week, have the estate conversation. Understand the family assets. Learn the basics of investing and inheritance planning. And most importantly, stop viewing inheritance as free money. Start viewing it as responsibility. Because someone sacrificed decades to build that wealth. Destroying it through emotional decisions is not unfortunate. It is avoidable. Subscribe to this channel. Like this video. Share it with someone whose family is building wealth but has never discussed inheritance planning. And comment below, what destroys family wealth faster? Bad investing or bad family communication?